Hello everybody, Ollie here. It's time for another look at the last few books I've been reading, and it'll give you a bit of a sneak peek as to what's coming up on the show too. Ooh, where shall I start? I want to start with this one. Jose Medina's The Epistemology of Resistance. If you've been watching the show a while, you might remember I did a video on 1984 and knowledge and who is allowed to have knowledge, and a book by Miranda Fricker called Epistemic Injustice. Well, Epistemology of Resistance is a follow-up to that and a criticism of that book in certain ways. And it's really interesting when it does build on those ideas, and it's going to be forming part of an upcoming series I'm writing actually called Are You Rational?, which is about epistemology and knowledge and how we get knowledge and what rationality is. Interestingly, although Medina doesn't go into this himself, I think this book is, or was quite important for me as an artist, because it's talking about how we communicate other ideas and how we appreciate other people's points of view, and I think art is quite a useful tool for conveying other points of view and would avoid a lot of the traps that he identifies when trying to communicate in this book. So just as somebody who's sort of making art as a living, as an actor, this is a really cool read. It is pretty difficult, in fact very difficult. It's one of the more difficult reads I've had in a while. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's interesting, but it's very, very difficult. There's bits of it where I'm like, I wish he'd said a bit more about this, but there's bits of it that are providing me with whole new ideas that I never thought about before. So yeah, good kind of middle of the road place to start. If you are going to get it, I would probably say if you're a philosophy student and you're interested in epistemology, and if you've already read Miranda Fricker, I'd get this one. If you're just like me, you're not a student, you're just a normie, then nah, it's probably not essential, but it's decent. Next up, let's talk about Max Horkheimer's The Eclipse of Reason. For the blessedly uninitiated, Max Horkheimer is one of the Frankfurt School thinkers who are at the centre of a Nazi conspiracy theory that you might have seen alluded to online, the cultural Marxism conspiracy. Horkheimer is allegedly one of the academics who were trying to undermine Western civilization, whatever that is, by secretly spreading Marxist ideas and also by daring to be Jewish. If this is one of the books that's supposed to bring down Western civilization, then I don't know, that doesn't say much about Western civilization in my opinion. The book is decent. It's about reason and rationality and how we use those words and what they mean. And at the start he makes this kind of interesting distinction between what he calls subjective reason, which can tell you if you want this, you should do this, and objective reason, which tells you this is what you should want. Where he starts to go a bit off the rails for me is where he says, these days, subjective reason, everyone's using it all the time, not like in the old days when objective reason was ruling the roost, and as such, fascism's on the rise, and it's the end of Western civilization as we know it because of subjective reason. And I'm like, really? When exactly in history did objective reason supposedly triumph? Because he has some very idealistic reconstructions of the Enlightenment. Nowadays we understand that the Enlightenment texts did not escape the context which produced them unscathed. He also has some quite idealistic reconstructions of the ancient world and ancient Greece in particular, and I'm like, again, he even acknowledges in places in this book that those ideas, Plato's ideas, certainly did not escape the context of their production. So although I find his distinction between subjective and objective reason interesting, and again it's going to be part of this Are You Rational series, it's where he starts trying to reconstruct the past and indeed the present, and I'm like, I'm not quite so sure about this one, old Horkheimer mate. The other thing that's quite interesting is that for such a kind of legendary social justice warrior text, he writes occasionally like a right-wing reactionary YouTuber. He's like, oh, people being subjective, it's the end of Western civilization, there's a crisis of reason. Also in some places he is just kind of really quite shockingly racist, even for 1947. He also can't help but tie rationality to masculinity. He can't, even in some of the metaphors he's using, he can't help but portray reason as an inherently kind of male thing. And that's another, I guess that's another limitation of the time. There are some really good bits in it when he's talking about how subjective reason is used today. Those bits are absolutely fascinating. As I say, it's when he starts trying to project it back into the past that I'm like, So, you know, if you're interested in Horkheimer, if you've heard him mentioned and you've not checked him out, I'd say it's pretty short, it's pretty easy as well. Might be worth checking out if you're interested. I've saved the best until last, and it is Susan Faludi's Backlash. I've been recommending this book to about everybody. If you've bumped into me in the street in the last month, I've probably done, here, take this book. It's a really fascinating idea because it's not a history of feminism and feminist progress. It's a history of the times when women's rights have been rolled back and the anti-feminist response, what Faludi calls a backlash. And I think that presents quite a good opportunity for us feminists to look at what the response has been, like how these ideas are being taken up and how they're being responded to and received. The book was published in 1992, so it covers the Reagan era in quite a bit of detail, although a lot of what it says about the Reagan administration is also very applicable and even prophetic now. It does go right the way back to ancient history though, so the anti-feminist arguments, it's fascinating, they come up in more or less the same form again and again and again, and one of them is that women are taking over men's spaces, right? That argument has come up in modern times, for Reagan times and Victorian era, and even Cato in like 19 something BC, when Roman women were allowed to drive chariots for the first time. Cato was like, it's women taking over men's spaces, and it's like, Cato, man, women can't even vote, dude. Like, what are you saying? The argument that what's making women unhappy is actually feminism. Feminism's what's making them unhappy this whole time. I see people saying that today. Turns out that's at least as old as Victorian times, when again, people were saying, it's this feminism, it's this women's liberation that's taking women out of the homes. That's why they're secretly miserable. And it's like, what? Like, again, women still can't vote, dog. Like, what are you saying? All this newfound freedom? What freedom? I would say this is definitely the book for the person in your life who says that things like hiring discrimination and wage gaps exist in certain industries because women make certain choices. If you know somebody who says that, just give them this book. She goes through in very, very detailed case studies how women were pressured into making certain choices. For instance, in 1976, the American Cyanamid Corporation offered some of their female workers the choice between either lose your job and be fired, or be medically sterilized. That was the option that the company gave them, because they had this fetal protection policy. Stuff on reproductive rights in this book is really, really grim. That was only applied to women, even though it equally applied to men, that said women couldn't be in environments where certain chemicals in the plant were. Even though the health risk was just as much to men as to women, this policy was only applied to women, and they were told either you lose your job or you get medically sterilized. And so a lot of them were pushed out of the job. Some of them got medically sterilized, came back to work, and the policy was changed. And that was in like 1976. My parents were alive when that was happening. Some of you were probably alive when that was happening. It's absolutely shocking. See also the case of Sears, Roebuck and Company versus EEOC, 1986. Sears and Roebuck were taken to court, and they said in an actual legal courtroom that the reason there were no women in their high-paying, commission-based sales jobs was that women just chose not to enter those jobs because they were naturally less competitive and less aggressive, and that's what it required. And they actually made that argument without consulting a single female member of staff, all of whom were then asked, do you prefer less competitive, less well-paying jobs? And they were like, no, we want these jobs, but they won't give them to us. That, to me, really reminded me of the Google Bro Manifesto, the kind of James Damore, the guy at Google who wrote the thing saying, women are just like, they naturally choose to stay out of STEM. And it's like, how many of your female colleagues didn't you consult on that one, James? Is it none? I bet it's none. This is also definitely the book for the person in your life who says that because discrimination is illegal, it doesn't happen. Because what Faludi shows again and again and again, with very detailed, specific case studies, is that although these illegal things might happen, the onus is often on the women who are being affected to bring the legal challenges, which, when they've got no money and they're at risk of losing their jobs or at risk of being fired for rocking the boat, is not easy, takes years, takes a lot of money, and isn't always successful. It's a very wide-ranging book. She talks not only about reproductive rights and legal stuff, but also fashion, the press, foreign policy at various points as well. It's really very, very broad, but also it's got a lot of depth. It's very accessible, it's very easy. I kind of read it on a series of train journeys. It's brilliant. Check it out. Highly recommended. There are links in the description where you can get these books if you want to check them out. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in whatever I make next. Bye!